Okay, I think we can start. There's still lots of people joining us, but we'll kick off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event on advancing equity and inclusion through intersectional approaches to data. So this event is convened by the Inclusive Data Charter, part of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, alongside the National Statistics Office of Colombia, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, the UK's Office for National Statistics, and Sightsavers. I'm Teacher Chisaka from the Inclusive Data Charter. Before we begin, we would like to take you through a few housekeeping points, which will also be posted in the Zoom chat box. We have live closed captions available during today's event. To view, please click on the closed caption live transcript Zoom menu button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitles. To increase the font size, select subtitle settings. We also have international sign language interpreters with us today. For the best experience, we recommend using speaker view at the top right hand of your screen, as we will be spotlighting the speakers and sign interpreters videos throughout. If a presenter is screen sharing, you can change your settings to show the speaker and the shared screen side by clicking view options and select side-by-side mode. To resize or magnify the interpreter's video, click on the vertical divider icon next to the image and drag it to the left. We encourage you to ask questions throughout on Slido, and you'll also be able to upvote questions for discussion. Details of the Slido are up on screen and will also be posted into the chat box. Audience members will also be able to come in at various points in the discussion by raising your hand using the Zoom function. Finally, we encourage you to use social media to promote the event using the hashtag IDC Data for All. This webinar will be recorded and shared afterwards. Thank you all again for joining us today, and we do hope you enjoy the event. I will now hand over to Karen Garcia, who will be our main host for today's session. Karen, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. I am Karen Garcia, head of the Differential and Intersectional Statistics Unit at the National Statistical Office in Colombia. And I send you a big greeting from the sunny Bogota today. I'll be your main host for today's event, as Ticha was telling us. We are very grateful that many of you have joined us today to discuss this important topic on advancing equity and inclusion through intersectional approaches to data, and the launch of the knowledge products that the Inclusive Data Charter and partners have worked over the last few months. DANE, the office where I work, the National Statistics Office in Colombia, is a founding member of the Inclusive Data Charter, which was launched in 2018. It's been very interesting to see the evolution of Champion's work, now moving more into intersectionality in data. This is an important topic for us at DANE, as in the last 2 years, we have been taking a multidisciplinary approach to inclusive and disaggregated data through mainstreaming intersectional approaches in statistical production. As a statistical office and as the working group in charge of mainstreaming a differential approach to data, we have been inspired and motivated by this alliance that showed us that despite of the challenges and the much of work that we have ahead to us, to generate inclusive data, many people in different parts of the world are working to achieve this. We are not alone in this task, and we can share the learnings to improve how we do our work. So we are very excited to be co-hosting today's event with the IDC and partners. The IDC advances the availability and use of inclusive and disaggregated data so that governments and organizations better understand, address, and monitor the needs of marginalized people and ensure no one is left behind. To do that, we need more holistic approaches that look at how different aspects of a person's identity, whether that's gender, age, disability, and so on, may intersect or overlap to create and compound inequalities. That's what we mean when we talk about intersectionality. Data impacts all areas of our lives, but uncritical data practices can have consequences, further compounding disadvantages and discrimination for those at the greatest risk of marginalization. An intersectional approach to data identifies inequalities within and between groups of people, based on how multiple factors of a person's identity come together. However, it goes beyond this to ensure that data plays a part in reducing inequality. And that means we need to use intersectionality as a lens to reflectively examine data practice, data processes, and institutions. The IDC's Knowledge Product series that we are launching today includes a range of content looking at intersectional approaches to data. We have a primer explaining that an intersectional approach to data is with 5 key recommendations for implementation. The 5 recommendations are displayed now on the slide. You can read them. The first one is establish a commitment to centering the voices of individuals at greatest risk of marginalization or discrimination in all aspects of data systems and practice. The second one is to promote equity across the entire data value chain. This is the process of generating data from the beginning, from the designing of the instruments and formats to collect information to the very end, the dissemination of information and the use of this information to take action. The third one is to ensure that institutional data systems are inclusive and safe. The fourth one is to engage data to increase context awareness and reduce inequality. And the fifth is to build inclusive institutions. Then we have a white paper which further unpacks what an intersectional approach to data involves and how to put this into practice. To support organizations looking to put this guidance into practice, there are a range of case studies from national statistical offices and civil society organizations where you will find some of the strengths and strategies that can accelerate the process of producing more inclusive data. There are many rich insights across the Knowledge Products series, and we hope this work will contribute to the growing conversation on intersectional approaches to data and to advancing knowledge and learning in the wider data community. You can explore an introduction to the intersectional products through an online interactive story map and access the full series of documents on the Content Hub that is live now. The links are being posted in the Zoom chat. As part of your registration, we ask you what you are hoping to get from the event today. On the screen, you'll see some of the key areas of interest you shared. The biggest word is data, of course, intersectional approach, data collection, insight, intersectional data, best practice, equity, knowledge, inclusive data, disability, tools. It's nice to see that maybe we are going to cope with these expectations. During today's session, we'll be exploring why intersectional approaches to data matter and how to put them into practice. We'll start off with a short introduction from some key project partners on why intersectional approaches to data are important in their contexts. Then we'll move into broader discussions with audience engagement focusing on 3 questions. We will be hearing from a range of speakers today and hope you find the discussion practical, useful, and engaging. I'll now hand over to the other project partners to introduce themselves and why intersectional approaches to data matter in their context. So Christelle, Selben, James, please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm not sure if there's a predetermined order or if we should just jump in.
Please, Christelle. Christelle, then Selben, and then James.
Then I will jump in.
You agree?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Karen. And thank you so much for organizing this event. It's really a pleasure to be here. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Christelle Casaba, and I'm the research manager at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, or IDMC. For those of you who don't know us, we work under mandate of the UN General Assembly to provide estimates on the number of people living in internal displacement, or IDPs, worldwide. And we also, of course, conduct research to investigate the drivers and the impacts of displacement and propose solutions. So in our context, intersectional approaches are particularly useful because quite often governments, humanitarian or development actors tend to see IDPs as a consistent group. But this in practice means overlooking the specific needs and vulnerabilities of children, women, older people, people with disabilities, and more groups of displaced people who do have specific needs and also resources, that we should account for to design tailored solutions. So we joined the Inclusive Data Charter as one of the first champions in 2018 to provide more detailed information on IDPs. And first, by disaggregating our data and analysis by different characteristics such as age, gender, main language spoken at home, income group, and so on. And now by applying intersectional approaches for monitoring and research. Now over to our next speaker.
Please, Selvin.
Yes. Can you see me? My video is not on.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone, or rather good morning, good afternoon. And I'm happy to be here to learn from a lot of speakers here and also to share my experience and contributions to the IDC. My name is Selben Penzin, and I work for Sightsavers in Nigeria. Sightsavers, as we all know, is an organization that is keen on promoting the livelihood and the equality of people living with disabilities, and generally also for people who may experience marginalization at some point in their lives, understanding that marginalization is a dynamic process. Proud to say at this moment that Sightsavers is one of the founding champions of the Inclusive Data Charter, and we have supported and contributed to some of the publications from the charter, including the primer, the white paper, and a case study which we used an example from one of the recent population-based surveys that we conducted in a region of Nigeria called Kogi State. Now at Sightsavers, we one of our key goals or our key aims is to eliminate avoidable blindness in the populations or in the regions where we work. We do that through empowering or supporting our local partners and governments to implement programs in the health system approach. But there's a tendency for everyone to think that we can just produce lofty ideas and implement them, but really there is no one size fits all to implementing or achieving our goals of eliminating avoidable blindness. And that is why it is very important for us to understand the peculiar needs of the population strata. For instance, we collect our data in our surveys and in our program processes. We disaggregate them by different attributes in the society. So we disaggregate them by gender, by age, by disability, or by wealth. And this sort of gives us the information that we need to understand who is being excluded at any point in time, or to understand if our program approach is meeting the needs of the population of interest. And then also it provides us with a background to delve deeper into generating more evidence into why this marginalization and disadvantage occurs in these people and how best we can come in and fill in the gap as it is. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to the next person.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name's James McRae, and I'm from the UK Office for National Statistics. For those of you that haven't heard of the Office for National Statistics, we're the recognised National Statistical Institute of the United Kingdom, and we're a non-ministerial department that report directly to the UK Parliament, and we lead on areas in the UK such as the census, a lot of the UK's COVID and economic statistics as well. From our experience, we've found that intersectional approaches to data are particularly important for allowing us to gather insight into the experiences of those that are most vulnerable in society, and those that might not often might not be reached within standard data collections. Fundamental to all the work that we're doing is meeting the requirements set out within the Inclusive Data Charter to make sure that we're leaving no one behind. Intersectional approaches we found are also important for allowing institutions such as ours to kind of analyse ourselves, so those that we're working with, and also how we're making sure we're engaging marginalised and vulnerable groups in the work that we're doing. From our experience, in order to achieve this, robust data sets need to be developed that can be split in more than one way. So, for instance, by both sex and age. And we've taken steps to build in intersectional approaches to our data to understand and respond to the diverse needs of our societies today and become more inclusive towards all of our citizens. And we will discuss that later in the session. I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, James, Selvan, and Christelle, for those very interesting introductions. We'll have an opportunity to hear more from Christelle, Selvan, and James later on, and to ask them some of your questions. Now we will move to our first discussion question. You have it in the screen. Before we do that, there is a quick poll. Please, you can access using the hashtag being posted in the Zoom chat now. I'm going to give you a minute to answer. Well, that's nice, because we don't have people that rarely engage persons with lived experience. Okay, we have now. Well, 46% of you say that sometimes you consult persons with lived experience of disadvantage or discrimination in some parts of the data value chain. 43%, well, now 41, you say that you actively work with persons who have lived experience of disadvantage or discrimination throughout the data value chain. And 14% answer that they rarely engage persons with lived experience of disadvantage or discrimination in the value data chain. So it's nice to see that the majority of persons that are here in the event today are consulting, in fact, persons that live experience of disadvantage or discrimination, which is important to effectively reflect these things in data production. Well, let's move to the discussion then. We'll now explore how intersectional approaches can help us to address inequalities and put at the center the voices of those who are being marginalized. We'll start off with Ambika Tandon, senior researcher of the Center of Internet and Society, India, who will share an example from their work in Bangalore, looking at caste-based discriminatory practices in domestic work. Please, Ambika, go ahead.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction, and also congratulations to IDC and the partners for developing a very useful and practical guidance framework for making data more inclusive. So I will be briefly talking us through a 2-year project that has been undertaken by CIS as part of the Feminist Internet Research Network. So the project was studying the entry of digital platforms that mediate work and employment relationships. An example of this is Uber in the transportation sector. So we were focusing on the domestic and care work sector in India, and undertook this work between 2019 to 21. We will actually be publishing the final report for the project tomorrow. Here I will briefly talk through the methodology for the project as it relates to the collection of inclusive and intersectional data. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the project were to produce a body of work on the domestic and care work sector with a focus on women workers from low income and caste oppressed groups. We wanted to work with unions and workers rather than study their experiences from afar. So we engaged a workers union called the Domestic Workers' Rights Union to work with us through the life cycle of the project, from the design of the methodology, data collection, right through to analysis. We took on 4 union members as co-researchers on the project, all of whom were first-time researchers and had considerable experience in on-ground organizing and dealing with the day-to-day concerns faced by workers, but not with research as such. So the pictures you see here are of some of these union members in their on the ground helping organize workers and deal with their concerns. So as they were first time researchers, we gave them some basic training on methodology and also explained what digital platforms are and how they impact workers, as there isn't a high degree of awareness among unions about this new digital intermediary that has been entering the sector over the last few years. Next slide, please. So through the stage of data collection, we undertook 65 in-depth semi-structured interviews. 33 of these were in Bangalore and were undertaken by our co-researchers in Kannada. I will briefly touch on how the participatory approach that we took benefited data collection. So it was most useful in contextualizing the abstract concepts that have to do with digital platforms to the realities, everyday realities of workers. So given the extensive experience union members held in on-ground organizing, they were well versed with how domestic workers experience and perceive the world, as well as their levels of education, digital literacy, etc. So the first step in our data collection process was to go through our interview guides with our co-researchers, which allowed us to contextualize the questions to the realities of domestic workers. And I'll give a concrete example of how that happened. So our project was particularly focused on trying to bring out some of the fault lines of caste discrimination and how that impacts women workers from Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi, which is indigenous communities in India. So we had thought to ask direct questions on caste discrimination. But the union actually thought that this is a very sticky subject and the direct approach wouldn't elicit a lot of responses. So they asked us to add some indirect questions instead about how caste manifests in the life of domestic workers. This can happen through, for example, employers giving separate utensils to workers than the ones being used by their own family. Also through segregated toilets and washrooms or segregated common spaces such as elevators in apartment complexes. So these some more subtle forms of discrimination are not self-evident to those who may not be very well versed with the everyday experiences of caste discrimination by domestic workers. So what might have happened had we not taken this participatory approach is that there might have been a data gap around the experiences of caste discrimination, as workers might have actually denied having faced these forms of discrimination because of the fact that it's a very sensitive subject. So we find that while most other qualitative and quantitative data collection processes account for these context-specific differences through, say, piloting their surveys or piloting their interviews, we would like to argue that it's not that it would be very difficult to use that approach to identify gaps in the data without the intervention of those who are very well versed with the context on the ground. So we then advocate for taking this kind of participatory approach to involve impacted stakeholders, and which actually leads to the collection of more robust and better quality data. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ambika, for sharing this example. It is very interesting on how the participation of social organizations can really generate added value in the construction of data. And also the particular issue of domestic work is one of the aspects on which gender inequality and its intersection are structured, in which work of data has made a difference in making this situation visible. Thank you very much, Ambika. We'd like to hear from others now on ways that intersectional approaches to data can help to center the voices of those who are marginalized. So please, I invite you to raise your hands if you want to speak. You can also add questions on Slido or about an existing question. Please, Mamelo, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that. And once again, also just a big congratulations to the IDC team for producing this excellent piece of recommendations and advancing the idea of continuing to make sure that we leave no one behind in data systems. I think for most of us who've been keenly interested in this issue of how data and data systems can advance inclusive development, I think we've generally been not satisfied with data disaggregation as the only arsenal, as the only tool that we have in our arsenal for dealing with leaving no one behind. And that's because data disaggregation, while indeed it works in making certain populations visible, and although it helps us to understand development in a nuanced way, it only deals with certain aspects of marginalization. And so this approach that's proposed here, which is taking a more participatory, more intersectional approach, help us to understand marginalization in a more extensive way. So for example, I really like the example that Amika gave, which highlights how, the considered situation of Dalit women in India. I mean, part of that marginalization in data systems is in part due to the marginalization in society. So within our work at the United Nations University in Macau, we have developed a data marginalization typological framework that helps us understand these forms of data marginalization. And so it really helps to see how this approach helps us to see the cascading impacts of marginalization along the value chain. And also more importantly, helps us to understand the unique identities of individuals and population groups that perpetuate their marginalization. And I think lastly, just I think one of the key recommendations from the white paper is this idea of how not just our data systems have to be inclusive, but actually our institutions as well have to be inclusive. And I think that's one of the critical recommendations because it recognizes the fact that actually data is not just data. Data is shaped by the data assemblages, by the societies, by the institutions. And I believe that, until we have these inclusive institutions and inclusive societies, we will always have this struggle of marginalization in data and technology artifacts. So very quickly for me, I'd just like to congratulate the IDC team and the champions for this excellent tool. And I'm looking forward, of course, to different stakeholders around the world operationalizing this tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mamelo. I see other hand up. Please, Renis.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to add another aspect of having a strategy for development of statistics, where the statistical organizations can build capacity, that is to various stakeholders within the national statistical system. Kenya has developed one, and we hope through this, it will work, because you realize that statistical officers do not interact directly with the marginalized population, but the other stakeholders do. So once we have that collaboration, then we believe that the voices of the marginalized can be heard even during analysis or during data collection. So that is a very good one. And it can be done through technical working committees. Yeah, thematic area technical working committees. Like in Kenya, we have specific technical working committees, for example, for persons with disability. We have one on education statistics. We have one on health, among others. So through those committees, we believe that we can get from the stakeholders, both state actors and non-state actors, on what is required to meet the needs of the marginalized. then we can address them during data collection or even during analysis. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Please, Edwina, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I just want to pick up from where Ambika stopped on the aspect of participation. And for me, really, the aspect of participation is what really, the aspect of participation is what, sorry, I'll just do my video quickly. Can you all see me? Okay, so when you think about the aspect of ensuring voice, then we think about participation in program. What participation does is not just to bring the realities of people, which is obvious. They'll bring the realities of people and how their different identities interact to make what they are or what they are living through. But what participation does, you're able to build voice, collective voice around specific issues affecting specific contexts. And also when, you know, just thinking about the work that we are doing in Sightsavers now, working with persons with disability, both as individuals and as collectives, the aspect of self-esteem, self-growth, self-person, I think these are really some of the nuances, the subtle but really intense, you know, change that we want to see in our growing society. Then when you really, again, when you bring in voice and participation through, you know, voice, then you start to look at how do we prioritize program? Because at the end of the day, really, when you have all this data and it doesn't inform any ongoing decisions, any prioritization, then it is just data, okay? So what does that mean? What do our programs look like? If we prioritize well enough, our programs will start to respond to context-specific issues that are informed by realities of different people in different places. Because I'm an advocacy person, allow me to add another policy element to this. When we start looking at how model programs look like, we are in a position to start informing policy decisions, policy actions, policy reviews, and then you know, start to demonstrate models of how this works. I think in this side of the world, and I hope I'm right to say, we still don't have programs or models that show how are we interacting with more than boy, girl. You know, you're a boy, you're a girl, you're a woman, you are living in, you're a refugee, you're in a rural setup, perhaps within the, you know, the lower poverty line. So when all these things interact and the government is able to provide programs that can demonstrate how, you know, they are able to interact with people in such situations, then we start to show how they're doing inclusive service delivery. Then just as a conclusion, I think even when you talk about having institutions, inclusive institutions, the other aspect that is quite critical is how do our institutions demonstrate everyday use of data? Because I think maybe the fear when you think data, you're thinking, oh, it's this thing, what do we do? But there's opportunity that are, I guess, ministries and public service delivery. So for example, the Kenyan colleague just talked about, we have a technical working group on disability, we have one on education. We now need to move to start saying, with the information we have or with the data that we are gathering, this is how we are continuously informing decision making and of course improving service delivery. Then we start to build confidence around how we can ensure that data is not just data, but is data that we are able to use on an everyday basis, you know, in planning, etc. Again, really congratulations to all this work and all that has gone into it. Thank you.
Many thanks for your interventions. Well, I think that we can conclude this first part of the dialogue. We can say that the participation of those who are part of these groups that intersects several characteristics that can imply discrimination is really valuable in the production process, is essential. We cannot build inclusive data without making the production process inclusive. those who have not suffered forms of discrimination in particular ways, can signal some aspects that we may be ignoring if we don't take into account their voices, and if we have not experienced directly these discriminations. And at this point, I remember Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, when she tells us how, for example, the presence of women in work groups and also the presence of people from ethnic groups highlights aspects that cannot be considered in their absence, because those who not suffer this discrimination cannot see the complete picture of how particular aspects affect people's lives when certain characteristics intersect. So I think these points that you have been telling us, in fact, remember that it is essential in our work to take into account this direct and in a direct way the experiences of those who have been marginalized. Well, now we can move on to the second part of the discussion. The guiding question is, what does applying an intersectional lens to data look like in practice? This is a very good question for us working in this job. We now move, before to do that, we have another quick poll coming up on your screen. Also, which you can access again using the hashtag being posted in the Zoom chat, and we'll give you a little time to respond. Well, we can see that the two first options are with similar volume of answers. And the first one, the first two, we have 31% of you saying that the main barriers are staff capacity and level of complexity involved. And this level of complexity reminds us that we really need to get a variety of voices involved in the process of data production, and also from a multidisciplinary approach. And then we have 14% of you saying that technical knowledge and expertise is a barrier, then financial resources, and then leadership or institutional buy-in and support. This is somehow good news, because we can say that in our organizations we have the directive support and the volunteers to do that. Well, so how we can address some of these challenges? We'll hear now from some institutions on how they are taking an intersectional approach across the data value chain, by which we mean the process of data collection, design of forms, analysis, uptake, and use of data. I will hand over to James McRae from the UK's Office of National Statistics to discuss the experience on taking an intersectional approach to data and some of the challenges and key considerations for practitioners to think about. Please, James, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm going to discuss a few methods the ONS have used to build intersectional approaches to our practices. I think the first thing it's very important to say is that I think that the approaches for kind of doing this will vary a bit from kind of country to country, depending on what existing data is currently available. I think it is important that there are common lessons that can be learned from each of our experiences, and hopefully today's session is going to aim to pull that out. So the first lesson, I think, is that partners should tackle issues of importance to their country and work with expert groups to assess which intersectional issues are national priorities. So within ONS, one of the things we did was create 5 cross-cutting centres that work collaboratively across the office, as well as with other government departments, academics, and other partners. These centres are the Centre for Ageing and Demography, the Centre for Crime and Justice, the Centre for Equalities and Inclusion, the Centre for International Migration, and the Centre for Subnational Analysis. And the aim of these offices is they really try and move beyond standard statistical production and aim to facilitate much more effective gathering and linking of data, along with specifically targeted research activities in order to maximize the impact of our statistics. Some of these centres experiment with different ways of developing intersectional approaches to data. And secondly, I think another lesson it's key to learn is that we should draw on multidisciplinary and cross-sectional expertise. And that means we need to be inviting different experts to assess how our data can be used to support marginalised groups. So within the Office for National Statistics, one of the things the Centre for National Analysis has done, which is one of the 5 centres I just touched on earlier, that focuses on statistical analysis for local and regional areas, and that they kind of frequently engage local government representatives at UK local authority level to establish what the localised data needs are. The centre establishes what data is available, proposes what additional breakdowns can be made, and uses this to respond to particular localised issues and target services where that's needed. Something else that has been done is that the UK Statistics Authority has created a new inclusive data task force. The aim of this task force is to critically appraise intersectional issues across institutions, and it involves stakeholders from central and local government, but it also brings people in from academia, civil society, think tanks, and businesses across the UK. In March 2021, we ran a public consultation to collect views on how ONS should progress the work of the task force. And recommendations were that we need to be taking a much more principled approach and have clear social inclusion goals, be collaborative and multidisciplinary, invest in stakeholder engagement, and embed inclusivity within our organisation's culture. So there's a few key lessons that can certainly be transferable across all of our organisations there. Besides listening to experts, it's vital to develop ways to consult the marginalised communities themselves. So one of the things that we've been doing within our work to report the Sustainable Development Goals is consider the best ways to disaggregate our data on our national reporting platform in order to ensure that no one is left behind and that our data is trying to capture as representative a population of the UK as we possibly can. Centres should also develop responsibilities and guidelines for disaggregated data. So an example is the census. So this is our key household data collection survey that we conduct every 10 years, and we've actually done one. We've done one this year. So that key data collection phase was March 2021. And we've adopted various approaches, including adding an optional gender identity question. We've conducted public consultations on how to include the Roma ethnic group in the census. And we've also developed postcards, which I think are being shown on the screen now, which help kind of show in various kind of languages to help try and reach people that we might otherwise have missed as part of this data collection. We've also developed social media assets and other various bits of collateral to try and literally reach out to absolutely everybody in the UK to be part of the census. Indeed, the census itself had we had a really big advertising campaign across TV and using lots of celebrities. and social media stars to really try and reach out to absolutely to everyone with a slogan of "It's about us." Centre for Equalities Inclusion also collected an equalities data audit in 2018 to establish kind of what existing equalities data was out there, and what new opportunities and requirements might be for the future. One of their key findings was the use of intersectional framing, and this is information, and that information on protected characteristics really should be taken together if at all possible. And then subsequently, in the last 2 years, they've really taken this work to try and operationalize this in the work that we're doing. So, for instance, in 2019, we've conducted research to test methods on producing population estimates by group and religion. And last year, we've done some mixed methods research on the impact of COVID-19 on people living with disability. And then I think the final lesson, and I think I touched on it earlier, is that we need to be inclusive in our approach to our workforce, our talent management, and our organisational culture. I think diversity is something that's absolutely fundamental to the way our office operates, and we have various strategies in place that promote diversity within the organisation, including all staff members having a mandatory diversity objective, and also there's various different staff networks and events for staff members to attend. So those are kind of the key messages, but I think it is clear that there is much more that can be done. So as a next step, our centre found that whilst really good progress has been made, there is still a need for much more inclusive data for these types of innovative collaborations. And we really need to be looking to take forward more robust data sets that are disaggregating data by more than one variable. So overall, yes, and just overall that we need to be trying to push and drive forward those kind of data sets where we possibly can. And then I'm going to hand over now, I think, to whoever the next speaker is.
Thank you, James, for this really interesting presentation. I think that here you pointed out some of the key issues of precisely what participants answered in the poll as main barriers for do this work. For example, the technical complexity, and we can see how nicely UK ONS has a lot of several centers of topics on how to address these topics in complexity packages, each one in each center. This is a big opportunity because, for example, here in our office in Dane, Colombia, we just have one group trying to address intersectionality in all the National Statistical Office. And this is one comparison of how limited resources can challenges are in some countries, because we don't really have several centers for each topic. For example, it would be great for us to have just one group working in migration matters, because now in Colombia we have an unusual dynamic of migration from Venezuela. And we are trying to cope with several aspects at the same time in the same group. So it is very nice to see how, in fact, the complexity of the topics to make data inclusive and to really work in an intersectionality way needs expertise and several working groups. And it is also nice how you showed us these task forces that consult experts and social organizations, because this is precisely one of the ways to cope with technical complexity of these topics and to address complexity issues to show them in data. So I encourage you to share any questions for James and the other previous speakers on Slido. We're going to select some of them to answer them later. And you can also upvote existing questions, and we'll take them after hearing from a few more project partners. So we're going back to Christelle Selben and Claudia Wells and we're going to hear about development initiatives to share their experience and on what practical things they think about when taking an intersectional approach. So please, Christelle, then Selben, and then Claudia.
Thank you, Karen. I hope you can hear me okay. I can't start my video, but you already saw me, so I think that's all right. Thank you for this question. I am actually very happy to talk about the way that we are trying to apply intersectional approaches to our work at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. And I really like to stress the fact that we're talking about an approach, right? We're not talking about a data collection tool or a methodology. It's really an approach, as in something that we need to keep in mind at every step of the process in everything that we do at IDMC. And one example that perhaps I can give that will hopefully bring some very concrete information as to what we do in practice is a case study that we conducted at the end of 2019 in Somalia. And we were trying to understand the way that internal displacement impacts people displaced by drought, and particularly children, and the way that it might affect their education. So first of all, for us at IDMC, it was particularly useful to build on our ongoing work and ongoing engagement with partners in different countries, and in this particular case in Somalia. Because without this constant engagement of our monitoring team, we would not even have known where to start. We would not have known where to find the people that we were looking for who were displaced by drought. And in addition to this, engaging with partners who are on the ground, as you mentioned, Karen, allows us to get in touch directly or indirectly with the people who might be affected differently, the people that we should include in this intersectional look at our data and at our analysis, and so on and so forth, which is information that we cannot have in Geneva, being Geneva-based, and also information that we cannot possibly have for every context around the world and every country that we are trying to investigate. So in this case, really partnering up with people from different organizations such as disability groups or women's organizations on the ground, teachers who work with displaced students in near Mogadishu in the Benadir camp was extremely helpful for us, even in just the planning phase of our research. It also helped us design a data collection tool that we hoped would be comprehensive and inclusive enough to capture these different vulnerabilities that we should be looking at and that we should take into account when proposing solutions to the impacts of displacement. So in that particular case, I just wanted to say that it was one of the most surprising and interesting studies that I ever did. As in, I expected that we would be measuring a massive negative impact in enrollment rates of the displaced children after their displacement. And actually, what we first saw was an improvement in their enrollment rate after displacement. And that's because they were, most of them, coming from underserviced rural areas. And when they found refuge near the capital city, they had better access to schooling. So we first thought then that was actually good news, and we were able to, for the first time, measure a positive impact of displacement. But then we looked more closely at the data, and we found that this was only true for boys. So already here comes an additional lens of a gender analysis, where we found that the girls were going to school much less after displacement, and the boys were going to school more. So we dug a little bit deeper by, again, engaging with more partners, conducting a further literature review, and so on and so forth. And we found that the likely reason for this was that because of displacement, these families had lost all income or most of their income. And in their area of refuge, they were only able to send to the nearby free schools maybe one of their children, or in any case, not all of them. And when they had to choose, they would most likely send the boys and keep the girls at home to help with chores and with the younger children. So I think if we hadn't done this particular approach to our data and to our research, we would have completely overlooked this group of children who were highly vulnerable and indeed require dedicated support. So I'll end here and hand over to our next speaker. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Christelle. Please, Selven, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Karen. I would like to say that for us, it's very important for us to approach our intersectional data, looking at it from the multiple levels that we have outlined. This is not very restrictive, but from the very basic stage of collecting and analyzing data, we have to consider the complexities that are involved, the technical complexities. Much as we try to, in our inclusive projects, we try to build the capacity of people with disabilities, for instance, we also have to consider the technical expertise that is really required. I'm using an example from the survey that we conducted, which is the rapid assessment of avoidable blindness, that requires a certain level of specialty in ophthalmology for conducting the survey. In developing and writing our reports, we also take into consideration accessibility of the report, because our end users are very often people living with disability. So we also have to consider how we're going to put in all the disability standards to make the reports accessible to them and readable, whatever the level of disability they may have. And then in engaging with our partners and the population of interest, we also have to consider the different needs of everyone, and to ensure that while we're implementing or giving disseminating this information, it reaches or it's accessible to everyone as they need it. We conducted a RAB, like I mentioned earlier, in a region called Kogi State in Nigeria, which is a population-based survey that provides us data on blindness, visual impairment, and the eye health services, and how the eye health services are reaching the needs of the population. And of interest to us here is that we included some other modules to this survey. We included a module on disability using the Washington group of questions. And then we also included a module on we used the Nigeria Equity tool, which gave us information on the wealth distribution in the society. And as a first step, having conducted this as a first step, we conducted a research uptake within the organization and presented the findings to them. And we are also in the process of getting together the key players or the key actors in the society who are going to be like policy makers and policy influencers, because of the major findings that we had around gender inequity in access to eye health services, and also for poor access to eye health services for persons living with disabilities. So it's important for us to get these key actors and key players to get their buy-in to promote the findings of our survey, and then to build strong policies and advocacy plans that would move that will promote the gains of our research. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Selven. Please, Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's a pleasure, and congratulations to you and all of the other partners in the Inclusive Data Charter for ensuring we retain this relentless focus on intersectionality, which is absolutely vital. I just want to talk through some of the approaches that development initiatives has been using to apply an intersectional approach in practice. We're an organization that works with governments to improve data production. That's both the processes and the systems, but we also on the supply side, but we also work on the demand side of data as well, working with users, looking at identifying gaps and the barriers to use. So thank you very much. If you just flick to the next slide, and I just want to say I absolutely agree with Christelle. This is all about approaches rather than being prescriptive, with Leave No One Behind being the glue that really holds the SDGs together, and the intersectional lens being absolutely fundamental to being able to implement that Leave No One Behind approach, forcing us to look beyond just outcomes and to really understand who's benefiting from these outcomes, which is really why it's so vital. So I'm just going to talk through in the next slide, if you can flick on, some of the 3 approaches that we use in practice. The first is our P20 approach. It's a focus on the bottom 20% of the distribution, both globally and in every country. And it's really about providing a simple, measurable metric and test you can use to start your thinking about how you target populations and track both poverty, inequality, and leave no one behind in practice. It uses disaggregated data, starting with breaking down populations into quintiles, be by whatever measure, that could be income or other measures of well-being, but then also urges you to consider other measures like gender, geography, age, and disability. And like I said, it's really kind of a simple kind of front-end approach to reducing the risk, I suppose, of losing that leave no one behind focus among the kind of 17 SDGs and their many targets and indicators. The second approach that we use is an approach to data landscaping. It kind of reflects on what James was saying about really understanding what data is available already, understanding the governance structures and systems that are producing those data. In particular, looking at vital foundational systems that allow everyone to count and be counted. And when we're considering that, considering the interoperability between those systems, which allows a greater intersectional approach. And the final one is really about working directly with communities. And again, I absolutely agree with one of the other speakers. This isn't just about being included in data, it's being included in the entire value chain around data. So a really broad inclusive approach. It's about human rights-based approaches within that, and considering, you know, quite often there will be populations missing from data sources. No data source is perfect. So to look broadly across data sources and to look to communities and the data that they're collecting about themselves and use that community-driven data to both address intersectionality and increase accountability. And before I sign off, I just want to share kind of 3 learnings that I think also are supported by some of the other speakers. The first is really the need for kind of foundational data systems. If you flick to the next slide, sorry. And foundational systems really need political commitment and funding. So it's really essential that as a community, we can keep the pressure on the need for those foundational vital statistics systems, management information systems that really capture information on entire populations. The second learning from a lot of our data landscaping work is the need to share response and learning across government. And it was really great to see ONS kind of striving to really make some of those connections across government with the establishment of their centres, but also making those connections not just across the national ministries, but down to the local level as well, which is really vital. And my final one is really looking beyond just your traditional sources of data, involving the communities that this data is about in the production, in the design, and using some of the data that these civil society organizations and communities are producing, because they provide such rich and valuable information on populations who are often very, very difficult to count in those official traditional sources. And it is a wealth of both quantitative and qualitative information on people's real lived experience that is really valuable to an intersectional approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. That was very inspiring. Thank you all for sharing those insights and experiences from your work. We selected one question for James. How did you select those 5 areas to have centers, James, please?
So in terms of those five areas, we largely selected them based on areas that there's potentially public interest in. So they're very much areas that the kind of the general public in the UK are hoping to see, are kind of very much interested in at the moment. And then the other one is just kind of I guess is the policy need. So I think that it was kind of recognised that at the moment there maybe wasn't enough data in these areas, and that it needed to be developed further in the UK. And therefore these therefore it was decided to set these specific centres up to really have that kind of focused need on driving those down, on improving data in those areas.
Thank you, James. Thank you all for your contributions to this part of the discussion. I'd like to thank for all your interventions and questions. We want to be on time in the agenda, so we're getting to the final part of the discussion. I would like to highlight a conclusion that is we agree in that this job is complex technically, but we are not alone in this issue. We have social organizations to consult, experts to consult, other countries to consult, and I think the Inclusive Data Charter is a great tool and a great group of people that are supporting us and making us feeling that we can share those lessons in order to improve. Our final part of the discussion looks to bring this all together in light of what we have discussed today. What can we do to promote more inclusive data practices within institutions? And Jenna Slottin, Senior Policy Director at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, will take us through this final part of the discussion. Thank you very much. Please, Jenna, go ahead. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Karen. I'm happy to take over leading us through and Dane's experience, not just reflecting on what's been said, but you can share your experience with us. So we're going to move quickly through focusing on this question about fostering more inclusive data practices within institutions. And we're going to go straight to a few speakers who have a bit of experience to share. Just reminding everyone that the time is ticking away, sadly, because this has been such a rich discussion, but asking our speakers to be judicious with their time. And we'll go straight through. We'll start with Renis Bundy from the Kenya Bureau of National Statistics. Then we'll hear from Karen Garcia from the Colombia experience at DANE. And lastly, Amoni Ayanda, the team lead for corporate social responsibility and reporting at First City Monument Bank in Nigeria, I believe. So over to you, Renis, please.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to be very brief. Now, from our side as a National Statistics Office, looking at the data value chain, we realized that we've been doing much of production and not looking at how the data that we're producing is being used or can be utilized much better to have greater impact. So to address this, we have come up with various tools, and specifically we have got various coordination tools that we are using to ensure that we have much inclusive data, and we involve various sections. As I had indicated earlier, we have what we call statistical technical working committees or groups that we have within the national statistical system, and there are about 13 of them. And we have specific ones that are dealing with the groups that have been left behind. Recently, we launched one on disability statistics, and we've tried to bring on board stakeholders, both from state and non-state actors. And we believe through that we can now get the input of even the persons with disabilities themselves, for example. The others include those on education, governance, health, gender, among others. So through those technical working committees, we are able to harmonize data from various sources and also to get input. Another thing is partnerships and collaborations. We have some existing partnerships with or without memorandum of understanding that we do use to address specific areas. Like, for example, in our area, we had an MOU with the Human Rights Commission to ensure that all the marginalized groups are included in the census that we concluded in 2019. And the MOU is still ongoing, so we believe that we can still ensure that we have more interactive and inclusive data on the same population. We also have the National Strategy for Development of Statistics that I talked about. This is a framework that is meant to build statistical capacity across the national statistical system. And it is meant to enable us move from a partially coordinated national statistical system to a fully coordinated statistical system, where the National Bureau of Statistics is able to coordinate various institutions and also give them an opportunity to interact amongst themselves. Yeah, so we believe through that we are able to address that. Now that the framework has got 4 focal areas and about 9 objectives that we have. And we have got various activities that we've planned. Just to mention the focal areas, we are targeting to have effective national statistical system by strengthening the legal institutional frameworks. And we are also aiming to improve the data quality in order to address the data gaps and adopt best practices in production and dissemination of statistics using the National Quality Assurance Framework, generic statistical business, or even the technical working committees, and also to build capacity. Then we are also planning to develop or strengthen infrastructure for statistical production. You realize that even among the stakeholders or data producers, they don't have good ICT infrastructure and even adequate staff or capacity to produce the required statistics, even if they have them. So that bit is also a gap. We have a gap there, and we are planning to work on that. Then we are also planning to have statistical advocacy to create awareness or access the use of statistical information and enhance relationship between the data producers and data users. So we believe through the strategy, we'll be able to capture a lot. Then finally, the last tool that we have, we are planning to develop Kenya Statistical Quality Assurance Framework that is meant to monitor and assess the quality of statistics produced by various data producers, because we always have the guiding principles. We have the 10 fundamental principles of official statistics and the UN 19 principles of quality statistics. So using those, we'll be able to assess all the data, even from the CSOs and even from the state departments, to ensure that we have as much information as possible. So that is what I wanted to share. So through those coordination systems, we believe that we can include even those who are left behind. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Renis. And I have to apologize. I see we have a hand up from among the participants, which is great. We're good. We're running short on time. So we ask perhaps that you might write your question into the chat, and perhaps we'll be able to get it answered in the chat as well. And now we'll just move over to Karen Garcia, please.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm going to be brief. Well, in a scenario with big potential but limited resources, we created a specialized unit for working these topics, the intersectional and differential statistics unit where I work. And we have basically 3 main lines of work. The first one is a strong direction to disaggregated data disclosure in communications strategy, because sometimes main users of disaggregated data and policymakers or journalists or activists need special formats for accessing to data. So they maybe are not specialized and they don't like to see tables in Excel. So we try to produce some special products in a more accessible way. And we also try to take advantage of the already collected and existing information that we have not published, more disaggregated. So this is the first strategy. The second one is to identify information gaps or lacks of data in matters that are of high relevance to certain population groups. After identifying these gaps, we propose new models or new sets of questions and efficient adjustments to deal with these gaps. For example, periodic measurements of menstruation or property lands data disaggregated by sex or age are topics where we don't have data, so we began to study how to deal with it, and we consulted experts and organizations and other public institutions to integrate sources and make proposals to cope with these gaps. Well, as one of the principles of the Inclusive Data Charter says, it is important to get the data from all possible sources. So when we sometimes detect some data gaps in relevant issues for differential and intersectional approaches, we can, for example, identify administrative records that can cope with these gaps, and that also allows an advantage in intersectionality, because they allow to disaggregate data for small populations. For example, in service, we have trouble sometimes to give intersectional disaggregations with statistical representativeness, but in administrative records we don't have the trouble. So the integration of administrative records in our work, it's something that we are exploring in order to improve our capacity to make intersectional disaggregations. But this is a big challenge in our region here in Latin America and in the Caribbean, because it needs a lot of tech capacity in machines, in computers, and also in teams. So we have a lot of learning in this topic, but we are advancing in this field. And the third strategy is generating guidelines and standards to mainstream a perspective of diversity and inclusion in data. And within this strategy, on last year, we published a document, a guidelines for intersectional and differential approaches in the statistical production in Colombia, to motivate, to organize concepts. And IDC, of course, was a big partner in this issue. So this third time is intended to motivate and to mainstreaming these approaches in the statistical production of our country. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And over to you, Omonyi Iyanda, please.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I hope you can all hear me.
Yeah.
Sorry, our anchor person, I just want to be sure that I'm very audible to everybody's end. Thank you very much for this very rich discourse. And to quickly do justice to the task I have, I'll be sharing about the data framework from a financial sector perspective. Of course, I happen to find myself in a bank, a financial industry, and the framework that we have latched onto has been a multi-leveled and a multi-sectoral framework that has aided our data mentions, our data capture in such a way that we've been able to create a very robust stakeholders engagement. Yes, this framework, the journey started for about 9 years now, yes, 2012. And there has also been some level of development discussions around what we started in such a way that we can have more engaging data captures and data mentions that will drive participation. In the past discussions, I see that we have mentioned some challenges and how we could move forward. And that has been the approach that we had used in keeping up with the framework that we use. I'll quickly like to share on the Nigerian Sustainable banking principles. While I'm talking, I'm kind of okay. I can share my screen, okay, but then I'll be very detailed around what I will be mentioning such that I keep everybody abreast of what I'm saying. It speaks to about 9 principles. These 9 principles covers the different areas of our sustainability agenda in such a way that everybody would see the data capturing platform as simple as possible. They will see, and they will also see their relevance. I mean, and not just seeing their relevance, it will also match up with the relevance of the type of business that we do in driving sustainability in our environment. And this has also largely helped us to bring a synergy amongst all the banks in Nigeria. I mean, that particular framework has been and all engaging a very robust framework that all the banks in Nigeria sees the relevance of the business that we do. We also see the relevance of the framework to driving the sustainable development goals, I mean, which is a global thing, and it speaks well around the relevance of what we do. The first principle talks about the environment and the social risk management. I mean, for us in the financial sector, we looked at how we would offer loan disbursements or loan facilities that won't bring bad or negative footprints to our society. And so that has some other indices that we're able to measure the impact, and we're able to categorize the kind of loans that we're given, either they are high risk loan, either they are medium risk loan, or they are categorized as a low risk loan. Also, the second principle talks to our environmental and social footprint. We look at our processes, we look at our operations, we now measure the impact of what we do in our host communities. We also have mapped some indices around this particular principle just to ensure that we keep a proper track around the impact of our operations and the impact of our processes to our host communities. Then the third principle talks about human rights. Very much, of course, this amplifies the rights that we have as employees, and also human rights even to those of our vendors and to some experts that we engage in executing all the manner of duties that we execute from the financial sector perspective. Then the fourth principle talks about women economic empowerment. Yes, a large area of the sustainable development goal talks about, of course, gender equity, and also talks about dealing with some level of inequalities. For us, we see that, of course, there have been a whole lot of marginalization around women, and so we try to amplify the different areas that we can bring a voice to women in terms of giving them support from their business and to some other social supports that surround an equal level for women to have a better voice.
Mr. Yanda, I'm sorry,
yes.
I'm going to have to ask you to just wrap it up in 1 minute, please.
Oh, all right. So, I mean, it talks about different, about 9 principles, and speaks to how we'd use this to drive data mentions and to bring simplicity around it, and everybody sees their relevance in what they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and apologies that we're short on time, but that was really fascinating and so interesting, Kate, to get a perspective from the financial sector and from yourself who works within a bank. So we've come to the end, and we'll just do a little bit of wrap up now on this session. This has been incredibly rich. I'm so honored to have been able to listen to all of the different experiences and perspectives. I want to take a moment to also give a big congratulations to Caitlin Bentley, who worked with the IDC team and the champions and the many organizations you heard on this webinar today to bring these intersectionality knowledge products together. It was not an easy task, incredibly complex, and so very well done. So a big congratulations goes to Caitlin. So as we wrap up, I'd like to just highlight 5 takeaways really quickly. And I would characterize these as being about getting beyond. So the first is getting beyond tools and moving toward an approach that looks across the entire value chain. The second is about getting beyond traditional statistics methods, looking at ways to understand localized needs and specific data needs to co-create with community members, including at question formulation, even before data is collected. And as I said, working across the value chain. The third is about getting beyond disaggregation. Disaggregation is incredibly important, but it's as important or perhaps even more to understand people's experience in society and to understand what that means in terms of institutions. Fourth was about getting beyond consultation. So consulting community members is important, but we heard a lot about participation and voice and agency, allowing people to exercise their agency through data and then through how data is used to impact their lives. And fifthly, fifth, about getting beyond aspiration. The Leave No One Behind agenda within the SDGs is an aspiration. But we heard today about practice, about all the different incredible ways that organizations and governments are looking to mainstream intersectionality and intersectional approaches in their practice and all the incredible results that that's leading to. So we'd very much appreciate your feedback on this session to allow us to improve our future events. Please take a few moments to answer a few quick questions on this event. The survey details will be showing on your screen now. A reminder that the Inclusive Data Charter is an open platform for all to join and for all to be part of these conversations. Please get in touch with our team if you'd like to collaborate and learn more. We hope you found today's discussions interesting and useful. We'll be looking to do future events and workshops on related themes. So if you indicated your interest on the event registration form, we will notify you as and when we do future events. And I'd encourage you to really take a look at the interactive story map and content hub for the intersectionality knowledge products. We can repost that link in the chat. And of course, it'll be available on our social media channels and the Data for SDGs website. The hub has all the resources we've talked about today, including case studies from the different IDC champions you've heard from. We encourage you to share the resources with others and look forward to continuing the conversation on this topic. Thank you so very much to the incredible speakers that we heard from today, not just for joining us and sharing your experience, but for all the incredible work that you're doing. Thank you to the Inclusive Data Charter team, and a big thank you from the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Have a lovely rest of your day.